begin. So last time around we left off and we had our drone all modeled. It's all finished up in terms of how we're going to add subdivision surfaces, and we've moved past the stage of having symmetry objects and all that fun stuff. So we're going to animate this here drone and get it flying around, and then we will take it into Keyshot, which is, if you notice a new icon down here on the taskbar, that is Keyshot.
You're not going to put any materials or anything on it?
We will,
okay.
Somewhat, but we'll get to that.
All right.
It is an aperture, a camera aperture, yes. But so that was a good question that was just posed. Are we going to do any materials to this drone? And the answer to that is yes and no. So we're just going to go along for the ride today. There's a certain order. There's a certain order that we want to do things or accomplish things in for today's lecture. In some cases, which I'll point out, there is a little bit of wiggle room in terms of what you do first, but there are a handful of things that we all have to do before we get into Keyshot. And those three things are going to be making sure that you have everything named and grouped correctly. And the important part, or the second important part about making sure that your stuff is grouped and named correctly, is also making sure that the anchor points for these groups are intelligently set up. So the stuff like the propeller that I showed off last class, this propeller is going to spin accurately along its own axis. It's not going to wobble or shake or be off axis any. And we can see here my propeller groups are just named propeller group 0, 1, 2, and 3. And inside of each one of those, I just have a null, and that null contains the propeller and the propeller hub. So pretty simple setup there. Identical throughout the 4 of these groups. So I'll just call these propellers. And then we've got our camera subdivision surface. Cool. And this has got all of the corresponding parts, all aptly named. And then the legs, not too complicated here, it's just a single piece. And then the body, which is, again, not very complicated, it's just the body, the propeller motors, and then the little battery coil things that go inside of the motor housing. So the first thing we'll want to do is we're going to want to set up a group, and at this point we can get rid of this old folder because we are a couple days or weeks past most of probably what is contained in that folder that we no longer need. So we've got our body, and it'll be a good idea to group the body. So I'm going to select the body here, Alt-G. So this is going to be drone full group. And then from here, everything else is going to go inside of this group. Because the reason for this is that now I'm about to animate this drone flying around. Now everything is in one group. I can grab it and it all moves together, up and down, side to side, all that fun stuff. So this is all good. It's going to make me very happy. And the reason that I grouped the reason that I selected the body as the group is just sort of looking at this as its like center point. The body's center point, I know, is going to be directly in the middle of everything that I've built. See, we can see it's perfectly here on the X and Z axes, as well as the Y axis. So that's all good stuff. One thing we will want to do is we're just going to make a little floor just for fun and blow this up. So clearly our drone is a little bit sunken into the floor, so we're going to do something about that. Jump to my side view, raise this up. Now I'm not going to exactly bother just with snapping, just because this is going to be super duper quick, and I don't want to mess up the anchor point of my group. So I'm just going to kind of zoom in and get that pretty much just like that. That looks about as close as I'm going to get it. So now my drone is sitting on the floor. It makes me a happy camper. It's facing forward, and I can start animating it now. So I'm just going to call this ground. We're not going to keep this ground here for long, but we do need it for the time being. So one thing that's going to be important is when it comes time to animating something like this, typically you want to have your object in a state that has all of these coordinate values at 0. But we can see that I've got a value in my position, y, 256 units, and in my rotation, 180 degrees. So what I can do is, without moving this object, but canceling or zeroing out all these points, is I can go down to this button, Freeze Transformation, right here on my drone group, and I can click Freeze All, and you'll see that all these values went back to 0, they went back to their default values, but my drone did not move. So that's going to be important. And the reason for that is because now I can set my first keyframe. Hooray. So I'm just going to key the position and rotation values. I'm not sure exactly which or all that I'll need for the time being, but now the important part is going to be trying to figure out how drones actually animate. So it would be a good idea to open up a search window. So let's try to find RC drone take off. Let's just see if we can find a little video or something. Alright, so that was fun, but not exactly, I don't think, the reference that we want to use. We don't want our drone to
These are all problems.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Darn. Let's just see if it gets off the ground. No. It's just, this one's just sad. Okay. So RC drone take off. Let's try.
That one, yeah.
This one looks pretty interesting. We got some sweet music. Y'all are gonna love this on YouTube. Watching. All right. So his hand is kind of in the way, which is a little bit of a bummer. But this is. Let me just try to find another one. There's an important part I'm trying to demonstrate here. When it comes to the fact that, like, how these things actually fly up off the ground. So let's just hope that we don't spend too much of this time watching this video and we get, like, copyright striked. So that would suck. Cool. This looks close. Maybe? Please? Okay, that wasn't too great either. Darn. Alright, so let's just watch this one and break this down. So he turns on the controls or whatever, and here we go. So the propellers spin up, and then it lifts off the ground. So that's oh, and it crashed. So that was the point that I wanted to inform you guys about, is that when a drone turns on, it's not just gonna, like, shoot up off the ground like a jackrabbit. It's got to spin up and sort of get some lift going, and then it takes up off the ground. So one thing that's gonna be a little funny here when we animate this is we aren't gonna animate the propellers in Cinema 4D. We're gonna do those actually in Keyshot. So we're gonna have this drone flying, but the propellers aren't gonna be flying for the next 5 to 10 minutes. So it's just gonna hover, but, you know, bear with me. We'll work out this together. So I'm going to give myself a couple more frames in my project. Let's just say like 150 or so. Right, so at this point, 0, we've just turned the drone on, right? Nothing, it's starting from static, and we know that we want to give it a little bit of time for the propellers to spin up before it lifts off the ground. So we're going to go maybe 30 or 40 frames, and then we're going to make another keyframe, and it's not going to have moved. So our imaginary propellers are spinning at this point, but the drone is still on the ground. Everyone follow? Makes sense? So now, I just randomly picked frame 42, and from here we're going to start to get it to lift up. So I'm going to give this another second, which is about 30 frames, and we're just going to ever so slightly lift this up off the ground, and then give it a very, very, very small forwards rotation, like a very small amount. 1 degree. So we'll keyframe these, and we'll see that it just sort of comes up, and it's going to be hard to see how much it's really turning, but not much, just because it wouldn't lift up straight. Like you can sort of see it's starting to tilt back ever so slightly, just because no drone would be perfectly balanced or weighted. I'm sure all of these, when we were looking at the RC drone fail videos, they lift up and then they just spaz out and crash or whatever. So we can see that it's pretty common for them to get a little woozy, when they first get up, and then they sort of gain their balance, kind of like Bambi on the ice for the first time learning how to walk. So we can pull this a little bit further forward into the timeline now and start to bring it up a little bit more. And maybe just give it a little bit of forwards movement and rotate it just a tiny bit differently now. Again, this is not an exact science, but this sort of imperfection is going to mimic the fact that this is sort of a kind of violent process lifting up off the ground if you are a tiny little drone. So it's kind of coming up quick a little, and then from here we'll just let it fly away. So we're gonna bring it forwards a bit, and I'm just gonna make mine fly kind of up and forward. You feel free to make yours fly kind of a little bit higher up or off to the side. Maybe if you want to get really fancy, try to do a trick or something. Probably not like a barrel roll, because I don't think these drones are capable of that. So let's just see what we've got here. So it kind of just lifts up, and then it just sort of drifts away. Now, our graph editor, as we will see if we open up the timeline window, timeline F curve, and hit H to frame everything, we're going to see, I'll try to make this a little bit bigger for us, that these values have a default amount of easy easing to them. Easy easing meaning that the keyframe is set to spline or easy ease. If you know your After Effects stuff, chances are you know what these words mean. But what they mean is, here in the timeline we see that these values are starting to level out, and particularly for the green line, which is going to be our Y height, and the X position, which is how far forwards it's going to fly, we don't want these to be shaped the way that they are, because what we're seeing as our drone is coming to the end of its flight path, it's kind of just like stopping. It's almost like it's kind of stalling in place. See, it's not like zooming off like, I'm making it fly away. It's kind of coming to a gentle stop. So what I'm going to do is grab these two Bezier handles in my timeline, and I'm going to angle these down a little bit. I'll do this do this one at a time, because it looks like they're going to need to be controlled slightly differently, or slightly independently, I should say. So now if we watch this, we'll see that the drone is going to move away at a bit more constant of a speed. Now I'm actually going to make it fly a little bit further actually. So I'm going to pull this sort of just a bit forward and rekey those. And we'll notice that I have to redo my graph editing here. I know this is sort of boring, but if you want to become an animator, you will spend a lot of your life in some form of a timeline, and figuring out why something is moving the way that it is in the graph editor is going to be an essential part of your career. If you want to get stuff to move, obviously reference video like we tried to find, you might want to spend a little bit more than a minute on YouTube gathering your reference, more than me at least. But I think this is off to a good start. I don't want it to be moving too crazy fast. I'm going to save right now, so I'll save out of version 6 of my scene. And I'm going to show you what I don't want it to be doing. So we don't want the following to occur. Where it just like flies away like a UFO, you know, conspiracy video, or it just, you know, flies away in the blink of an eye. A small little consumer drone like this is not going to be rivaling aircraft in terms of their air-to-land speed, so don't have your graph in the viewport look so extreme like this. It's going to be my suggestion. So we're just going to undo that. Cool. So this is a little bit more appropriate in my opinion. And the reason we're making it fly like this is because for our at least for in the case of our animation, is we're going to have our camera sort of framed somewhat kind of like this, where we're going to be able to see it in plain view the whole time. It's going to lift up and then fly off screen. So we do want it to move enough to where it is going to, you know, fly away, either off camera to the side or off camera sort of upwards. So you do want to give it some motion, just not, you know, like a bullet. So I think that's good as far as the animation goes. And again, all of our keyframes are contained to this drone full group right here. It's going to be pretty important that we do it like this, because if I ungroup this just to demonstrate the improper way to set up your hierarchy, is something like this will happen. We don't want that. This is no good.
It blew up. See you later.
So undo that, get our group back together, cool. So now we're going to do the materials. As we mentioned earlier, we both are and aren't going to be tackling those extensively inside Cinema 4D at least. By the end of the project we will, or by the end of today, I should say. So I've got a couple materials that I want to identify here. We've got our white plastic, which the main part of our body, and in my case the legs, and it looks like possibly even the propellers all have this same color, which is sort of a relatively matte but fairly bright white plastic. It's not too glossy or shiny. What I mean by that is, see if I can find a quick explanation. So this one looks pretty close. So this one looks great. It's tiny. This one is a lot shinier. This would be a bit more glossy. This is almost kind of like a polished plastic, whereas mine is a rougher, much less polished. The highlights sort of here have a very almost sort of gradient mesh illustrator sort of quality to them in terms of how the light is falling off. It's very sort of subdued. And then we've got our metal, or what looks like metal. It's probably just painted plastic that wants to look like metal, but we'll make it metal for the fun of it. And the camera mounts and the camera down here appear to be a similar material. We don't really have a whole lot in the way of these screws, but the little bit that we did will probably be a similar white plastic to the body. And then the red stripes here. Now the red stripes are a lot glossier. These are a shinier amount of plastic. And then finally the last material, just as the little sort of cherry on top, or bottom so to speak, will be the little rubber feet. And if we wanted to really get fancy and crazy with it, we could try to get this yellow stripe and even the little black tops for the propellers. So we may or may not get to all of those little extraneous details, but let's just see. So what I do want to do is I'm going to want to start making these subdivision surfaces editable, and the reason for that will become self-explanatory once we do these legs. And additionally, when we're going into Keyshot, we can't have any objects that Cinema 4D that are native or only to Cinema 4D. So something like a subdivision surface is not just a simple polygon object. A subdivision surface is a function, it's some sort of item, like a symmetry object or a cloner or whatever. That Cinema 4D is what's making the object. So we have to make these items specifically editable by hitting C. So we're just left with the subdivision, the leg sub D. So I'll just rename this legs. Now, assuming you have your object set up and you've got good good edges, with your knife tool and all that fun stuff, the bevels, it shouldn't look too much different once you make it editable. But now, what I can do is I can go down here. Now it'll be a little tricky or a little annoying to do this a couple times, but I'm going to select a couple of these edge loops on my feet, the little feet of my drone. And so with these selected, I'm going to hit my U key, and the command that I want to do is grow selection, which is Y. So we can see that I'm just going to grow this selection outwards until I get sort of up to this point, sort of somewhere in here. So I think maybe one more. And then we can probably turn the ground off now. And then I'm going to select these ones in here. And then now just use my spacebar or my selection tool to add in a couple more. So just want to select these feet. I know this is going to be a little tedious, but it's not too bad. Missed a couple. Now, actually I did not do that in the order that I wanted to. So if you're following along step by step, in the video, we're gonna deselect all of that. Sorry. And we are going to select this one here. And now what I'm going to do is because I need to select this on all my feet, it's going to be a little kind of annoying. So again, sorry in advance. is I have to get this material applied to all my feet, not just one. And again, I'm just going to use the UI selection tool, and this is going to go a little bit more smoothly than the first time I just did it a minute ago. I think that's a good amount to stop at. And now with this one, what I want to do is I want to split this object actually off. So I'm going to hit R. Actually, can I do? I think I can just do a material tag. Yeah, so I'll make my first material then in this case, and we'll just try it. I think what will be the easier way. So I'm going to name this rubber feet, and just make it black-ish, grayish. I don't need to do anything else. I don't need to do anything in reflectance. None of that. I just want to change the color and name it. And then I can drag and apply that to the feet, and we can see that it applied the material, rubber feet, and it used a polygon selection tag to apply it just to the feet, which is good. So now I can make this will be white plastic. And I usually like to, when I'm naming my materials for Keyshot, is name it in a way that I know what color it's going to be, and also kind of like what it should look like, whether like rubber or plastic, metal. You can even use words like shiny or rough, or kind of whatever, to just be a little bit more self-explanatory. So then I'll bring this up to full white, and then now I will just apply this to my object. Oops. And we see that I applied the white over the black, which I don't want to do, so I want to grab the white material tag and bring it to the left of where the black material tag is. And so now we see that the black is applied to the feet only, which I think hopefully should make my life a little bit easier down the road. So now I'm going to jump into the camera group. So these washers, I believe, are going to be the only part that I'm going to make white, because I'm going off of this reference image, at least for the materials of my drone. So we see that these, this is what I'm calling the white, the little washers. So this looks pretty similar to the white plastic of the body and the rest of the drone. So I'll drag and apply that there. And then I will make a new material, and we'll call this camera metal. And just for funsies, I'm going to add a Beckman layer to the reflectance. Now this is not necessary, it's just kind of for my own little organizing. So this camera metal material will get applied to the mounting plate up there, and we're going to see that it's just going to kind of look shiny. It's going to look black, but it's going to look sort of shiny in our viewport, just to give us a little sort of a little something to look at. The next mounting plate can get that material, and you're going to see that, at least for the time being, this is going to apply the same material to everything that is below it, which is not entirely accurate, because we know that at least one of these materials here is going to need, it's going to need to be turned to glass. So we have to have some sort of lens on the front. So let's make that little material, and I'm just going to turn on transparency just for fun. We'll call this lens glass. Now the reason I'm doing this, oops, I want to make sure that I'm applying this to the lens specifically. The reason I'm doing this, applying the materials in the way that I am applying them, is because we sort of want to treat the way that we're applying these materials in Keyshot as almost like we're sort of grouping the object. So anything, even though we're not going to change the hierarchy, the actual grouping hierarchy that we have here, we want to just apply these materials one at a time to everything that we can think of that will have that material. So when I made the lens glass, I sort of jumped over the fact that I also want to apply a metal material to my little motors. So I'm going to find the propeller motors right here, apply, even though I'm calling it camera metal, I'm just going to apply that because I know that I do want to make those metal to some degree. So now I see that my little coils, that I wanted to make those a yellow. So I'm going to name this yellow plastic. Just make this yellow-ish in nature. Can apply that to the coils, so we see that those are in there. Cool. They're hanging out. The camera body does not have the right material on it, it looks like. Looks like we're going to want to apply the white to that. Cool. So what's next? Probably the body, drone body. And then the propellers. So I'm going to select all my propeller hubs and all my propellers. I don't want to apply materials to the subdivision groups or the nulls. I want to make sure that I'm applying these materials directly to the objects. And so instead of dragging and dropping 8 times, I can select all of these that I know that I want to apply the material to, right click on my white plastic and then hit apply right here. And so even though these were white in the viewport, it is not going to look too much different, but I now see that I have the white material tag applied to each of these objects. That's all sweet now. So opening up all my other groups, it looks like every single object in my scene has a material on it. I think the last step is going to be trying to figure out how I want to apply these red stripes. Now, you are welcome to going through and doing the UV mapping and all that fun stuff that we did from the bottle assignment. If you want to practice those steps again, reinforce that knowledge into your brains, I would recommend that, but the sort of quick and dirty way to go about doing this is going to be doing more selections, just like kind of how we did the little rubber feet. So I'm going to select my drone body, and I'm just going to solo this just for the time being, and go to polygon mode, and I do need to make this editable first. So I'm going to hit C on the drone body. Cool. So that made the drone body editable. And so now I've got a whole lot more geometry to work with. And the reason is because these red stripes need to be placed in particular areas on the body. And it looks like it's on the 2 forward legs, the way that the camera's facing. Probably, if I had to guess, to help you figure out which way the drone is facing when you're flying it. I don't know. I'm no drone expert, but that sounds pretty logical in my head. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it. So I'm going to select some of these edge loops, and it'll be a little bit easier for us to see what I'm doing if I just switch my display mode. So I'm going to select maybe 5 loops there. Oops, daisy. And then jump over a couple, and then do another 5 loops. So that looks kind of about right. So I'm pretty close there. Cool. So that's that arm, and the following, this arm over here. Now this is going to be sort of fun if I want to be precise about this. So I'm going to count these loops: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12 is going to be the first one that I want to start on. feel free to not do this if you aren't OCD. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So shift click there, so do 1 or 2, 3, 4, 5, skip 3, and then do another 5. Wait, I did 6 on this one.
Yeah.
I mucked this all up. So shift click that, control click that, shift click that, there we go. I'm not going to double check. Measure once, cut once. We're just gonna go with it. So I'm gonna make a new material. And actually, if I want to be thorough, these red stripes don't wrap all the way around to the bottom, or whatever colored stripes they are. We see that they sort of stop. Some point, see, they don't come down. Or actually over here, it looks like this one's got yellow stripes. Seems like every single picture I have has a different colored stripe, but we can confirm that they don't go all the way around along the bottom. So we'll just pick somewhere randomly to stop.
So are you just control clicking to get rid of this?
I am just control clicking these, and it will remove my selection. And I messed up.
Well.
Oh, yeah.
Life is never easy. So now I'm just going to my normal selection tool, and I'm just going to hold control, paint all those down. Cool. So now I get to try to figure out how many of these I do. So I'm going to count how many are between them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Cool. This is fun. So I'm going to start from the middle and work my way out on this one, just because I have no clue what I'm doing. It just seems like I do. Alright, so 2. So I'm going to go 8 in one direction. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Cool. So that's like a thing, kinda. I don't expect you to be this precise, but you're welcome to. This is just sort of how I quote-unquote try to be precise in my own artwork. Good enough. So we've got this one, we're going to call this one red, shiny plastic. Make that one there red. Full saturation. Bam. So if we jump back to our normal shading mode and unsolo, we see something that kind of looks like a drone. Cool. So now's a good time to save and make everything else in my scene editable, and then we'll take a little break. So make this camera editable. We see that just hitting those retains all my grouping. But one thing I do want to do is I'm starting to get like too many groups that are sort of unnecessary. So I've got a null here and then another null that has everything in it. So like one of these nulls is extraneous. I don't need it. So with the top null selected, I'm going to do this command delete without children, which is a fun command there. And what it did is it deleted the top null and it left everything else that was inside of it. If you're worried about screwing that up, don't do that if you're nervous. It's not going to hurt anything, it's just going to leave you with a little bit more than you necessarily need in your object grouping. So now with all the propellers selected, I'm going to hit C on all of these. And again, I'm left with however many different propeller groups, but this time it's good because each one is named differently. We've got propeller groups 0, 1, 2, and 3. So that's all cool with me. This one we'll just rename body. Cool. So I think I'm going to save, and we're going to take a break, and I'm going to off camera make sure that I didn't completely bungle this, and we're going to import it. So stay tuned. So we're resuming. Last time, or just 7 seconds ago, we saved out the drone, and we just saved it as a .c4d file. That's all cool. And now we open up Keyshot, and you can find that on the school computers by typing in Keyshot, and you want to open up Keyshot 6 64 floating, because it is a 64-bit program. That's a computer word. If you don't know what it means, don't worry about it. But then you want to go to File, Import, and you want to find your folder and import the file that you just made. So in this case, it is my version 6 drone, which is the one that I've animated. And you're going to get some options here upon importing. I believe that these are all the defaults, but if you are doing this side by side with the video, make sure that you match up all these checkboxes, just in case somebody came and put a bunch of wonky settings on your computer. So this is all good. Then I can click import. It will go through a second, and here it is. Here's my drone. Now the way that Keyshot works is it's always rendering. You know, like how in Cinema 4D we have to set up lights and then click render and then like wait, right, and then like move our camera and then click render and wait. You know, this is kind of boring. Keyshot works in a way that it's always rendering anywhere you move your camera, but as I'm moving it around, you're going to see that it sort of looks kind of grainy and pixelated somewhat. So as you're moving your camera around quick, it's going to look grainy like that, but then once you let it sit still for a second, the quality will go up. So this is, you know, what you see is what you get in this program. This is, if I clicked render right now, this is the exact image that I would get. No funny business. So one thing I do want to make sure, at least for right now, it should be on by default, but I want my lighting mode set to basic for right now, just because I don't want this to be too slow. Like if I set this up to full, and now it's like a lot laggier and just awful to try to work in this. This will be what we'll do for, you know, a final quality file, but just for right now we want to set it to basic so that we can actually move around and see this dang thing work. So we want to make sure that our animation came in all good, and when you first open up the program, chances are this animation button will not be lit up and the timeline will be hidden from you. So if you click animation along the bottom, you'll see that the timeline will pop up, and we've got a timeline that kind of looks pretty similar to Cinema 4D's, and we see that we've got our frames here, and so I can, you know, kind of scrub my little timeline and I can see my drone flying away. This is all fun stuff, and it matches up the same time, the same amount of frames that I had in Cinema 4D. You will note that this is the units are in seconds, so just, you know, keep that in mind. If I'm at 1 second, then I'm at frame 30. If I'm at 2 seconds, I'm at frame 60, so on and so forth. So we'll see that we don't have any sort of lights or anything in the scene, and the reason for that is because if we go to this environment tab right here, we have an HDR loaded kind of by default. Now we sort of went over this a little bit in the last assignment for the product rendering, how to give the surrounding kind of, if we sort of look at all around our drone here, sort of from underneath, we're seeing that there's this image that's sort of wrapping around us and providing light. So we can change what this texture is going to look like, or what this environment is going to look like. So right here is the one that's currently applied, but then we can go to the equivalent of the content browser, which is now over here on the left. This is the library. And we can scroll through. I'm going to hide the timeline briefly. So I'm going to go to Environment, and for my first one, which will be my animated render, I want to do an outdoor scene. You can do an indoor scene if you want, but I'm just going to look through what we've got here for outdoor scenes. So this one looks kind of cool, and all I have to do is drag and drop into the viewport here, and we'll see, whoa, yeah, whoa's right. So now this image is applied, and it kind of looks, if you have your camera angle set up a certain way, it's going to look like this is actually sort of in this picture, which is kind of cool. So again, obviously our propellers aren't doing much, but we can see, you know, the shadow is accurately lifting up off the ground. That's all cool stuff. So now let's take care of that propeller situation. Now that we've got a environment picked out. So how do we animate these objects? That's a good question. The way that we animate in Keyshot is a little different from Cinema 4D, but try not to get too frustrated. So the first things first is we have to go to Scene, and this is where our objects are going to be. So under this little Models folder, this is where our object that we imported is going to be. So I want to scroll through here. So I've got the drone full group, but I want to come down to these propeller groups. And this is when it gets fun if you are on a very small very small resolution monitor, is finding these groups and finding which one's which. So what I've got to do here is I've got to select this, and then I can go to Animation. So I'm just selecting the first propeller group, and Rotation is what I want to give it. And so now this rotation, now that I'm down here sort of in my timeline, my settings, what I want to do is I want to figure out which axis this wants to rotate on. Chances are that one's not the right axis. If I raise this up to 360 degrees and just kind of zoom in, we'll see that it was not, whatever that is, it's not right. Yeah, this is how you wind up on those YouTube videos where the drones crash.
Yeah. There you go.
So without too much hassle, I found that the Y-axis is the one that I want to set it on. And because I did my due diligence in setting up all my grouping and my anchor points and all that good stuff in when I was still in Cinema 4D, I don't have to mess with any of these other settings down here. The orientation, the pivot, all this stuff. If you do get into Keyshot and your propellers are wobbling and sort of getting all crazy all over the place, we will have a little bit of fun in terms of figuring out how to fix this without completely redoing your Cinema 4D scene. So do your due diligence. Hopefully you've already done that up to this point, and all you've got to do is click the Y button. Now one thing to note in the timeline here, if I zoom out briefly, is that we'll see that this propeller spins for a little while and then it stops. Okay, like why did it just stop? The reason it just stopped is we can see that this little cyan colored bar, this is representing the animation that we just added to our scene. We can see that right after 1 second it stops, right? We see that just kind of like when we were working in After Effects. Imagine the After Effects timeline. This layer is basically turning off right at 1 second. So we can click and drag along the end of it and drag it all the way out, and we'll notice that now it is spinning the whole time, but it's just not spinning very much. And the reason for that is that over the whole length of this animation, which in this case is 5 seconds, we've told it to only spin 360 degrees, which is not as fast as drone propellers probably spin. Chances are, I'm just going to try a value of like 5,000 because I've done this once before, and we'll see, we'll just start to get an idea. I'm going to turn this from down to basic mode, which will be even lower quality, but that looks a little bit more appropriate.
Probably needs to go quicker, huh?
It might, yeah, it might even want to go quicker. You know, if you want to, you know, fight me on how fast you think the drone should be spinning, then by all means go ahead.
I'll look it up on Wikipedia, see what the average rotation.
Yeah, try to find out. You know, if you're a crafty person on Google, try to look up what the RPM, the revolutions per minute. Do a little bit of math, because right now we're only over a 5-second span. So, you know, obviously there's 60 seconds in a minute. If you find out if your drone spins 10,000 times in a minute, then you've got a little bit of math ahead of you, because that's over a minute span, not a 5-second span. So break out your algebra and you know, solve for that there variable. But I'm just going to type in 7,000 because cool. So one thing I do want to make sure is that this propeller is actually spinning in the direction that I know it wants to, or that I know it should be spinning. Now one thing I did sort of jump over is the fact that I'm moving around in the scene the same way that I am in Cinema 4D. I'm holding my Alt button on my keyboard, and I'm using my right mouse button to zoom in, my middle mouse button to sort of pan around, and my left mouse button to rotate. So that should feel pretty familiar. But as we remember, or hopefully, if I just zoom in Cinema 4D, the side that I want to be rotating the forwards edge is this straighter edge, not the side that has the curve on it. This is the leading edge over here. So I want to make sure that in Keyshot this is actually spinning the right way, and something tells me that it's not. So I can make this number minus 7,000, and so now it's flying in the right direction. Sweet. And let's not forget that because we made our pairs of propellers opposite of each other, right, so this propeller and this propeller are the same, whereas this one and this one are inverted, right? Remember that these are twisting in different ways because of aerodynamics or something. So we want to grab this side right here and then make this side also rotate the same way. So let's find this group in our object menu, and this is the fun part. So that was, we just did group 0, and then we'll skip over 1 and then go to 2. So this one, we can go to animation, rotate, again select Y, enter in minus 7,000, drag this little slider over, and so now hopefully these two sets of propellers should now be going the same way. Cool. Now if you are eagle-eyed, you will recognize that these propellers, of course it's not going to do what I just was preparing to explain. I was going to say that these are not going to be in sync, so sometimes you might have to enter in a slightly different number. So if you made one minus 7,000 and then the other one minus 7,100 perhaps, they would rotate ever so slightly differently, and they wouldn't look like they're exactly in sync. But of course, in a live presentation, oh, here we go. In a live presentation, that is not going to work. So we can see that every frame that these are facing the same way. Now, I don't think that's super accurate, because I've seen drones that have propellers that are somewhat slightly cockeyed from each other. So I'm just going to undo and get that back to how that was. Cool. Now, instead of going back through and setting all these different object things up, I believe there's a way to copy and paste these animations. So let's try that. Nope. I lied. Alright, so we're just gonna select group 1 now, animation, rotation, do Y, and so this one will be plus 7,000. And then just do the same thing to the last group, which is group 3, animation, rotation, 7,000, Y, and then bring these two out. Cool. So these are spinning about the right speed for when the drone is flying. Oh no, they're not. Oh, I'm having that fun problem where
It's what?
they're not. Sweet. What have we done?
I thought that was all.
They were working. I swear this was working.
Does it have to do with how in your timeline 2 and 1 are like shifted?
They shouldn't.
No, because then they're just gonna spin at the same rate.
Ah,
Here.
that was the case.
Oh.
Ah.
That was weird.
Good eye, Maureen. So our trusty fact checker here in the front row noticed that these animations were ever so slightly not lined up.
Oh.
If you rewind, you'll see that they were not all starting where they should have been starting.
Why would that cause the propeller to look like it was spinning off?
That is a great question, and I can't answer it.
Some animations were ahead to other animations. So one animation was playing before another started.
Mhm.
So it would be farther in its animation.
It'd be like
the other one's
past
being
now.
able to-
That's true. But
That makes sense.
it
We'll
sh-
go with that.
that might be why, but it's still perplexing why that it would move the anchor point. But
It would have, I don't think it did. I think it just looked like it did.
might have been. So make sure that these are starting where you want them to be starting. That's the short answer. So one thing that I do want to make sure that we're all recognizing is right from the start, these are just like going at full speed. Whereas there would be a brief period at the beginning where they would ramp up sort of from a standstill, and they would sort of go slowly, and then they would be all the way at full speed after a couple seconds. And I believe the way that we set that is with one of these tracks selected, I just scrolled all the way down to the bottom here at rotation, and I'm going all the way down to the bottom to time settings, and I want to select ease in. And so I'm going to select this setting on all of these, and then we'll compare. We'll compare this now to what this used to look like. So if we zoom out a little bit, go back to the beginning, so that we'll see that these are now, it's looking like I'm turning it on and then it's generating some momentum, da 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 da, and then now it's flying away. So that's basically it. We've got some materials, and we'll notice that the white doesn't like quite the way that it should, and the metal's not quite there as well. So we can select these, and I'm just going to hide the timeline because I think for the most part we're settled on that front. And I want to select this lens glass, double click into it. Now I could start going to replicate the settings in here, but there is a wonderful material preset in here in the library. Much like how we use the content browser, we can search up like gold, for example, in the content browser in Cinema 4D, and then we have a variety of different gold materials to search up. We can do that same thing here. And so I'm going to find something for my glass down here for the little camera lens, because right now we can tell that we can't see into the little camera lens. So I'm going to select one of these clear glasses, and this one looks pretty cool. I'm just going to pick one at random and apply that to, I drag and dropped it right to that object. So that was pretty straightforward. And it applied it just to that lens. Now I could have done a little bit more work on modeling the interior parts of my lens, but you know, hopefully you did that. Make yours look a little bit more realistic than mine. Oops. Now let's sort of take a look at the metal, which is where our mounting plate and these things up here were. So we're going to scrub down to the metals and oops, open that up. And I'm just going to look up something that probably is like aluminum. This one looks pretty appropriate. The rougher aluminum. So drag and drop that onto that object right there. And we'll see that it applied it there as well. Next thing we'll be trying to find a rubber for the feet. So let's try miscellaneous. Nope. So let's try typing in rubber. Nope. That's disappointing. Alright, we'll move on past that. So we're going to try to find a plastic. So let's find a glossy red plastic for our red stripes. Let's drag and drop that. Cool.
Can you lighten that at all?
Yeah, I can, and you can make some changes to these. So now that I'm over here on the right, this is where my materials are. So here's my list of materials. I can double click to select the hard shiny red plastic, which is the one that I just selected, and I could sort of roughen that up a little bit. If I wanted to change the redness of it, I could sort of bump it up. Make sure I hit OK. So you have, you know, pretty similar amounts of control compared to what we're used to in Cinema 4D. Obviously the interface is going to, you know, be a little different. So we'll jump into the rough material, or the rough plastic, and we're going to grab this one for the white and drag and drop that onto the white of the body. And so we'll double click that, select that. So one thing that I know about white materials is that no white is purely 255 white. So if I pull this down even just a little bit to like 230 something, we're going to see that this is starting to take on a little bit more sort of color and environmental sort of information from its scene. We have a very bright blue sky, so this is sort of casting a little bit of a blue tint to it. If we were to change our environment to just try this one for the fun of it, we'll see that this is going to look a bit different. Now this is super duper bright. So I would want to go to environment and adjust this brightness setting, or maybe the contrast. Just kind of play around with these settings until I get something that's not so crazy bright. So this is maybe a little bit more appropriate for that one. But I'm going to jump back to the one that I had, just because I liked it. Bring these back to 1. Maybe not. Cool. And then the yellow showing up good down there. Pretty happy with that. I am not happy with how rough or how reflective this aluminum is. Sort of want to tone that down just a little bit. So I'm going to pull its color down and its roughness up a little bit, just because this is honestly more of a metal colored plastic instead of an actual metal. But we're just going to pretend that this is maybe like a more expensive premium version that includes metal parts, authentic metal parts.
So the wing on your drone.
Yeah. And if you want it, maybe I shouldn't say if you want to, but you could potentially make a case for having a crazy looking drone, like if you wanted to type gold and make it gold, like I don't even know what this is gonna look crazy. So that's a little weird. It's kind of like a bulbous, bumpy. Let's try like gemstone.
Ooh, that's pretty.
That is pretty. That's super cool.
Nice.
I'm sure the glass drone is gonna be a good idea.
Glass. I'm about to make it marble.
Ooh, we can get off the ground.
No, this.
Ooh, pretty.
But you know, this can be kind of fun to play around with.
Granite, just like break the ground.
It wouldn't be able to fly.
Yeah, you're right.
Metallic paint. Ooh, I might switch to this for the.
Purple.
Up,
Do
up,
purple,
go up,
purple,
go up, go up.
purple.
There you go. The one right in the middle. Nope, that rosy color.
This one.
Yeah, do it.
So we're just having fun. Cool.
It's sparkly.
It is very sparkly.
Dear Lord.
So
Hello Kitty
It would
drawing.
affect it. It's not the real color.
Go to your local.
so this is like
Let's try it so hard.
this is like a metallic car paint that has like a pearlescent flake to it. So this is pretty sweet.
Everything.
You could, kind of, I would encourage you to play around with this just to see if it sparks kind of an interest within you when it comes to like rendering and material stuff, because there are follow-up classes to this that you can take to learn more about rendering, or if you do wind up being into this, I know that I am, and it can be fun to model something in Cinema 4D and then just sort of play around for like a couple days, just making it look different, just sort of practicing on, figuring out what kind of stuff looks cool. This black one would probably look pretty sweet.
That's nice.
Again with the metallic flake paint. But I'm just going to take it back to boring plastic. Sorry to be a downer. My boring drone. But I'm going to go back to this metallic paint for the for those. Cool. So yeah, have some fun with this. Maybe bling out your drone if you want to. Don't go, or maybe do. Maybe just don't listen to me and make it pink, purple, and green if you wanna. As long as you do everything else, make sure that your lighting and all that stuff looks good, looks proper. You're animating.
Get that to look like it's actually sitting on the ground.
because I was a little bit further ahead in my timeline, so it had lifted up off the ground
Okay.
ever so slightly. So now that we're here, we're back to the ground. I can see something that's resembling the fact that it is planted to the floor, yet to take off. I'm going to want to set up my, well, actually it'd be a good idea to save because I haven't saved to this point. So this is a good pop-up. If you do need to make sure that you take this file from one computer to another, make sure you read this and understand what it's saying about how you need to save your file. But I don't for my case, so I'm just going to go to my folder, and I'm going to name this chicken assignment for drone animation, and this is going to save a .bip.
Is that what we'll be turning in as the .bip or something?
We will not be, but I'm just saving this file just in case the computer crashes. And the next step, which is setting up the render settings. And it's always a fun task to try to figure out the resolution in this program. So I set image, resolution presets, landscape. I set it to 1280 by 720. So this is what we're going to want to do for our animation. This is this is what normal high definition was, not full high definition. A little older now, but it'll do the job. And I forget where the settings are. Right. Okay, so the settings are just under render. Of course, it's not render settings, but render. So I'm going to set the resolution back to 1280 by 720. And this is, pretty familiar stuff to us. It's laid out a little bit differently, but we've got our name of our file here. We've got the folder that it's going to save to. So obviously I don't want to save it to this random folder on the computer because that's going to go nowhere. I'm going to make a renders folder within my project folder, and this will be animated render. Oh, to make a folder, animated render, select folder, and so this is what it's going to name my files. JPEGs are pretty fine. We remember how to use After Effects to turn a JPEG or a PNG sequence into a movie file, so you'll want to refer back to the earlier videos if it's been a while. But it is important that we want to render out an animation that we switch it to animation, and of course it did not save any setting from that menu. No, I want to be an assignment for. Here we go, renders. So that's good because I was actually saving to the wrong place anyway. So shame on me. So I don't want to save an MPEG file. I want, oh man, I'm just not, here we go. We want frames output. I need to just stop and read. Here we go. So here's my name, drone, this weird little symbol. Don't worry about that. We want that there. .jpeg, cool. So JPEG's fine for me. I want to go to options and make sure that this is currently on, set to all 12 cores, and the samples per frame, in this case 64, that will be a good amount for our animated render. So write this down or screenshot this when you're watching the video. Make sure that you follow this. This is all good. Cool. So I would click render and it would begin rendering my animation, but then I wouldn't be able to do the second part of the lecture for you. So Obviously, I will have to come back and click render at this point. I've got all my files set up and all that good stuff. I can see that this is the right amount of frames that I had. I've got all my folders set up, all good, good, good. Cool. I'm going to save this project. So then I would click render, you know, it might take half an hour or longer, shorter than that, who knows. It'll make my frame sequence. I would go to After Effects, make my movie file, you know, we've been there, we've done that. But now, the second part of the turn-in assignment, as you'll remember, because I said we are turning in one animation and one still image. So we're going to go and do that still image now. So I'm going to save my file as, so that's why I named this file animation, and this one will be called still. And the purpose of that is now I'm free to change my materials, I'm free to change my lighting, I'm free to change my render settings, all that fun stuff. And now I've got one file that's all set up, ready to render my animation, and in a moment I'll have a file that's ready to set up and ready to render my still image. So I'm going to go ahead and make my little scene for my still image. And the way that I'm going to do that is we're going to pick kind of a more interesting camera angle, because on this camera angle our thing just kind of lifted up off the ground and it flew off frame, sort of not too exciting. You know, it gets the job done, but it's not, you know, we're not going to win any cinematography Oscar awards with work like this. So let's try to step it up a notch. We can go to camera, in our perspective camera. Oops. So we've already got a camera, obviously. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play with the focal length of this camera and try to come up with some sort of cool oopsie daisy camera. If I can find my camera settings here, so I'm going to try to sort of do like a cool action movie. Maybe this drone is part of a drone police chase or something super drastic.
Get that cool Dutch angle.
Yeah, Dutch angle solve everything. So here I just turned on a little button which is called motion blur. Motion blur is fun. So now it looks like my propeller blades are actually turning, which is pretty sweet. That looks cool. Makes this thing look super awesome, badass. Yeah, this is sweet. So now I can add in some depth of field, which is another one of those things that replicates the way that cameras work. Obviously cameras, I'm not going to go into too much depth, but because of the way that a camera lens works, it is taking snapshots at a point in time. And we get things like motion blur because it is actually a physical process of the aperture blades moving, and in that amount of time your object can sort of move, and that movement of your object is what creates the blurriness from motion blur. But on the flip side of that, the depth of field is at what point along your camera lens is what is in focus. So I'll just check on depth of field, and then I want to click this little point which is called select point of focus, and I'm going to select kind of the belly of my drone sorta, and then let's just see what happens if we'll want to lower our f-stop. So if we go too crazy with this, I'm going to turn off the motion blur just for a second to help illustrate. We see that the background, this ground that we were looking at, is now no longer in focus. As you see that I'm sort of changing this f-stop value, you can, in non-camera terms, you can just think of your f-stop as how much depth of field you have. Smaller means more. So with an f-stop of, now this is not like a realistic stop, but like 0.3 is going to get me quite a lot of depth of field. And what this is doing is it's helping to pull my subject, in this case the drone, away from the background. It's helping kind of separate those, creating a little bit more visual interest. So I'm going to turn back on motion blur with that little button right there. And I'm going to start trying to change the materials on mine. And this is where I'm going to go wild. I would say maybe for your animation, don't go too crazy with your materials. But for the still, let's just get weird.
This tune.
So tune.
So it's like a cartoon.
Yeah. So this is sort of like cell shaded. There's a little bit of line work. This is kind of like Borderlands, the game. So that's pretty cool. But I'm going for like badass. So let's. I want carbon fiber. And on my material, on my carbon fiber, I know the texture. I'm going to scale up the size of the carbon fiber ever so slightly, and hopefully I'm going to start to see new camera, add camera. Okay, so I've got free camera and camera one. So in camera one, I'm just going to zoom in hopefully. So now our depth of field is kind of going haywire. So we're just going to uncheck that real quick, turn off the motion blur. And I just want to be able to zoom in and get a feel for what this carbon
yeah.
fiber is starting to do.
Yeah.
So if you know what carbon fiber is, you know that this looks pretty accurate, kinda. Oh, it's too much. And just feel free to kind of play around with these values, sort of do whatever, wherever your heart goes, follow it. That's my instruction for this step. Trying to just make this a little bit more noticeable, because I know from my far away camera that it's going to be a little bit harder to see. What other material can we do? Let's grab one of those crazy metals that we had earlier and make that something down here maybe. Blue metallic car paint, why not? And let's just give it red feet. Deep crimson for the feet, because why not? So that's cool. You know, I really, if this looks fun and if you're just watching the video and you're following along and this is fun, like, have fun with this. Go wild. You know, like, if this sparks an interest within you and you know, sort of run with it. I would really feel bad about not encouraging you to at least try this out.
If you wanted to change the propeller or the legs, there's a way to get in there so that, I mean, you're applying that, it's applying to the legs, propellers, the body.
Mm-hmm.
Change the colors for each.
Yeah.
I think I can. It can be a little bit tricky with how. Let me close that up. Drone full. So we can see like what materials apply to each of these. If I wanted to take the legs, so let's just try to apply. Just try to apply this to just the legs and see if that works. So I think it worked. So I dragged it from the viewport directly onto, just do that again. So now we can see the legs and the body are no longer on the same material anymore. You can see that we've got it like a black down there and the carbon fiber up there. So if it did, yeah, it overrode the material that was on the feet. So I would want to go back and find my deep crimson, because that's just fun to say. And it looks like I've got a little bit of a problem now. So here we are. We've got this one. So you'll have to jump through some hoops. It did.
Yeah,
Yep.
there you go.
So you'll have to jump through some hoops in the object list or whatever. You know, if you want to start applying different materials to different parts. Actually, I think just real quick, I'm going to apply a white. What is this? I'm going to find my camera. Not the actual camera, but the modeled camera. Camera body. Lens. So we lost our glass. So we'll jump back to glass. You could also make it like leather, like if you wanted to. Just really explore here.
The leather drone.
That might actually look sweet. Oh, I think I just made the whole camera glass. Whatever, it's sweet. I'm gonna call that that. So I've got my camera is all sweet and set up. I turn back on my depth of field and my motion blur. If I can get the menu to come back right there. So now the menu, okay. The timeline's just hanging out. We're just gonna put that over there. So this is gonna look pretty sweet. Last thing I'm gonna do is try to play around with these environments maybe. And just find something that looks cool. Kind of cool. I like the way that it's lighting it, but I don't like how it's just like a wash of white in the background. That doesn't really give me any sort of context to what's happening. Some of these might be wild.
What is the color cursor?
Factory. That's cool. Now we're in like a warehouse. We're in like some assault or something. Chase scene. This is exactly what I wanted. So I'm just rotating this image around, trying to find something that sort of catches my eye in terms of like how it's lit. Like this is kind of cool because I can sort of see it's acting as a rim light. If we go back to what we learned in the product assignment, where we've got a sort of a bright light sort of behind the object, we're starting to catch a defining light sort of right along some of the tops of our propellers or the arms. Certainly with the propellers catching some of this glare, this is pretty cool. This is something. Digging it. There are these you have a little bit of control, not much, but a little bit of control with how the background is sort of shaped with this height and size setting. Now they're not easy to explain like what each of these is doing, and I see that I can no longer scroll sufficiently far down. Ground. Not sure what that's doing right there. No big deal. So I'm going to go back to resolution presets, and for the still image we want to make like one big bad one. So like 2560 by 1600 is going to be a pretty large resolution. Now obviously this monitor is about a third of that size in resolution, so I'm not really seeing it, but once it comes time to render it, I'll see it and it's going to look super sweet. So the last thing I want to do is bump up the rendering preset from basic to maybe product, or possibly one of these other settings, and just see if this looks more cooler. Full simulation seems to have done something. Definitely made it slower, that's for sure. Maybe a little bit too slow. I think that's going to be good enough. So now I'm going to go to my render to get to my settings, and for this one I want to make sure that I jump back to still image. That's super important because you did not want to render an animation at these settings. You will be here all week rendering. And as fun as that sounds, we have to be reasonable with how many resources we're using here at school. So I want to select the preset that I had, which is 2560 by 1600 back there, so it just punched in my resolution for me. Go back to my renders folder, and now this one I don't want to put it into animated render. I don't want that. This is just going to be still. Go back to my options. This is cool, maximum samples. For this one I want to bump up the maximum samples to, let's just try 256. That's probably going to take a while. But cool. I'm going to close that right there and then save this project. And so now I'm going to start rendering. This will take a pretty healthy amount of time. So I'm going to stop the render and if necessary pick it back up once these are done. If not, then see you in the next assignment if you're watching this video.